Internet. My name is Matthias, aka Major VFX, here at the Maxon 2019, Las Vegas, Nevada. Last day, a lot of still really good presentations. Actually, I would say great presentations in store for you. So next up is my good friend Lorcan O'Shanahan. Let's give him a big round of applause.
All right. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Maxon for having me here. It's always an incredibly humbling experience just to meet some of the faces behind the incredible work I see every day. So that's amazing. And then also it feels like I meet half the internet here, so at least my own little internet. So that's great too. And of course, everybody online, thanks for tuning in. I know it's late in the week, so thanks for coming out. So yeah, my name is Lorcan O'Shanahan. I'm currently freelance under datalust.ca. That's me, and my Instagram if you want to check me out. I'm a motion graphics artist based in Vancouver, Canada. I've been working there since 2011 when I went for school. Just loved it, stayed, and since then I've been working in the film industry. I've worked on TV shows, in broadcast, technology, and I've also done some VFX as well. So within that, I've helped with technology visualization, software, and development. I've worked with doing a lot of FUI and HUD work, as well as working with like VFX, like I said, on occasion. But most of all, I'm working inside Cinema 4D, and that's my hub. So whatever I do and whatever I touch, I'm kind of passing through Cinema 4D, either through the whole project, or just in the beginning, or just in the end, and then just creating assets in it and taking it to comp, or actually just doing the whole project and finishing it there. So I'd love to show you just some work real quick, my reel, and then we can get started. All right. Okay. So what I want to go through today is actually talk a little bit about just my own creative process outside of all of the client work. I usually find most of my inspiration just comes through exploration, learning. I love being able to have my hands on new software and tools. And that's kind of where my Instagram is just my archive, my dump. I don't post a ton of creative work on there, but it's mostly just my own little endeavors into trying to figure out a technique, or just develop a skill or something like that, whether it be 3D, UV, or just 2D or whatever. So these are the ones I'm going to be looking at. Let me just scroll back here. So this one is kind of interesting. This is kind of when I started learning about fields and trying to understand how I can use those in a sort of Gray-Scott method of reaction diffusion growth. And it taught me a lot about how fields work and how they can be more dynamic than just more advanced, how would I say, fall-offs. They can actually take on a life of their own, and they can be quite organic and give your scene a lot of life. So I'm going to go through. There's a couple of methods for making this work. I'll go through the simple ones first. So let's just dive in here and take a look. First of all, I want to turn on the fields and zoom in, and we'll get a sense of what's happening here once I hit play. So this is in the bare minimum just a vertex map, and we're using the freeze modifier to grow our initial selection. So we set our initial selection here with this spherical field, and then this freeze effector, what it does is every frame it will look at at the points in the field, and it will be able to just kind of grow out based on your radius and your effect. The one problem with this method is that if you have a very regular grid, you can see the artifact that kind of becomes very clear. It becomes very square, and you get some straight lines out of something that was supposed to be spherical. So there are methods around that. One of them is to just make a denser mesh, as you can see here. Oops. I think I just copied something. No, never mind. So you can see I made the mesh a bit denser. I made the mesh a bit denser, and I'm still doing the exact same effect, but my radius is a little smaller, and the strength effect is a little slower. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. If I go into remapping, we haven't enabled remapping or anything, so this is just straight up the Cinema 4D default growth settings. So hit play again. Oh, I need to turn it on. Whoops. There we go. And you can see this is a little bit better, but we're still getting this kind of, I don't know what that is, these straight lines in it, which I don't love. If I turn off this, you can kind of see it a bit better. Start that again. So you're still getting some artifacts here, so it's not great. I think I have to give Chris Schmidt a shout out here, because he was the one that I believe at SIGGRAPH he mentioned that you can do it a different way, and this gives you a better result for what we're looking for here, which is just more organic, like circular motion outward. So if I turn on fields here, this guy, we've already got it set up. And so the difference in this one is that we're now setting the mode to average. So instead of grow, we're here on average. And without any other settings, so if I just bring this back to default, you'll see what's happening. Basically, it's just kind of blurring out or averaging the pixels that are, or the points that are next to each other. And the result is a sort of blurring outward. But if we increase the inner offset, what happens is we're kind of clamping where that can happen and how quickly. So it will blur quicker to maximum, and so it will just expand outward. And if we kind of take a wider view at this, what we see is a straighter and actually more round shape, but we're still using the same point density. So that's something to keep in mind. I think it's a bit more of an effective way to get this growth system. So we can actually kind of go a step further and make it a little bit more interesting. So let's do that. Bring it back. I'm just going to turn off these guys for now, so we're not slowing down anything. Turn this guy on. Okay, so here we've got the decay, but we're not exactly using it just yet. So what's happening here? In this one, we're doing the exact same as above. We have a freeze and a spherical field just to start that simulation. If I select that spherical field and bring it over here, for example, it will grow out from there and kind of respect this weird noise that's happening. And so what that is inside the freeze, we can actually set a radius. So this radius here, which is set to 20, it can actually be controlled dynamically while it's happening. So we throw a random field, which is over here. Shouldn't be there. You can actually see as I'm moving it around, something's happening there. So the noise is actually changing. So I can kind of update this in real time and give it a different set of instructions, or just animate the noise. But what's important to note here is that we can create a really organic growth outward system with a static noise just thrown into the subfield's the radius subfield. And all this is just a random with set to noise, and then I'm just using a purlin with a little bit of animation. All right, so that's quite nice. Starting to get something I like, but I kind of want even more life. I just want this thing to kind of keep going and have a life of its own and to move around. And we can actually do that with the decay. So that's essentially going to take the previous frame and subtract it by some amount from the current frame. And we can control that subtraction here, and that would basically be the speed at which it clamps down and reduces it back to 0. But the effect, when you have a moving noise inside the radius, like we did before, so I've still got the same noise, and it's animated too. So if I set this, bring in this noise, where is it? If I bring in this noise, we can just preview what it looks like. It's kind of hard to get a sense of what's happening, so sometimes I just bring in a noise and set it to max. And it should... No, it's not doing anything. Maybe because everything else is turned on. Okay, well, I don't know. Usually what I do is I just create the noise and put it on as just a standard layer inside the field. And then that will just let you see and visualize how that noise is looking. And then I can bring it down into the subfield here under the radius. So let's hit play here and just see what happens. Of course, nothing happens. Let's see why. Freeze, remapping, that's okay. Did I not turn it on? I didn't turn it on. Okay. So you can see now what's going on. That noise is controlling the radius, but then the decay is kind of crushing down on it and deleting it or reducing the value at that point, the field, and giving us this sort of this motion. So with just changing these numbers or reducing the scale, let's say like 400, we can get different noises. We can have it move around in different ways. I think I even changed the decay as well a little bit if I play with it. So it's killing it a lot faster there. We give it a little bit more time. It might be able to get away faster. And you see, with just getting the settings just right, you can actually just let it take on this life of its own, and it will just keep going forever, which is really cool. And you can use this to drive a lot of different things, including dynamics, cloners, all sorts of things that might be on the surface of this material or of this geometry. Okay, so what else can we do? Let me just turn that one off. Okay, so we got... This is going to be something similar. So what we have here is the same average outgrowth. I'm being a lot more strict with how it clamps inside the freeze growth, the averaging. So it's a lot quicker to reach maximum, but then the decay is a lot quicker as well. And so what we get is like this very sharp wave that just kind of undulates and moves around in a very organic but predictable way. And I can just take this and, oh no, maybe not. Well, I could add some animation here and just get it to move around again. The other thing you might be wondering is how am I restricting this displacement to just the field? And that's quite easy, actually. It's by use of just these. So I'm actually just offsetting the entire field, the entire geometry up with this displacer. I've put a white color into it so that it's just 100% effective across the surface. And then with a simple little tag, I'm actually going to use Shift-C for a lot. I don't really go through menus anymore, and if you don't do this already, you really should, because it's just way faster and a lot less of a headache. But you have to kind of learn what you're looking for. That's the only thing. So restriction, so I'll throw that on. And by default, it will just restrict everything. Nothing is allowed to go through, so I'm going to drop in the vertex map. And of course, that doesn't work for some reason now. Oh, I have two. OK, so now it works. And so that's just going to restrict it and give us a nice little extrusion. The other way you could do that is actually bring in the vertex map into here, but I find this is just a simpler, more direct way that doesn't involve going down into many little tabs and trees and stuff like that. So I think you can kind of guess where I'm going with this. Let's throw some noise into that radius and see what happens. OK. So we'll turn that on and hit play. And so this kind of takes on the same life as before, but now we're getting a much more organic pattern that changes across the surface. We're using the decay, this spherical field, just to give us that starting point. We're using the very steep offset on the remapping for the average. And then in the radius, we're using the random field again, just to drive those differences in radius. So how could you use this in kind of a more interesting way or in actual production? Because this is nice, but it isn't really useful in any major way unless you're doing specifically that, what I just did. So I kind of came up with this little scene that uses these interactions, but builds on it as well using dynamics and the cloner. So let's just take a look at what's happening here. So actually what I'm going to do is not give you the final reveal yet, and I'm just going to build this up from scratch. OK. So what I want to do is clone a number of shoes. This let's get a cloner in here. Clone a number of shoes, which I have here. And with that growth, I want to kind of drive a dynamic simulation that will just make them move or fly around or do something interesting. So first of all, let's just get the clones onto the surface, which is quite straightforward. Select our cloner, and we can change the mode to object and throw in our plane. And what we will get is not quite what we're looking for. We need to just add a little bit of transformation onto one of these axes. I never get the axis right on the first go, but I did there. And then, yeah, there we go. And then I just want to lift it up to the surface. OK, so that's not quite enough, and it's not random enough. I just want to like give it a bit of life. So let's increase the numbers. Whoops, increase the count. And also, let's just kind of push them apart and rotate them so they're not intersecting. So we've got a perfect effector for that within MoGraph, the push apart. So let's throw that in there. OK, that's doing way too much. Let's bring that down. Maybe just say like 1 centimeter, no, 2. You can just see it starts to push them apart. Let's kind of drive up the iterations just to make sure. And that's looking fine. So let's just organize this. So I'm going to make a effectors and also throw in a random. So actually, I'm just going to search for it. Random effector, randomize. By default, that's going to do position, but I want it to do just the what should be the Y rotation, but I bet it's not. Yep. There we go. And now we got the shoes kind of just all facing different directions, and it looks a bit more like they were just scattered there haphazardly. So now I want to kind of bring in that same animation method that we were using before. And we're going to need the original plane, this guy here, and we're going to use a vertex map to create the simulation. So let's do that. Obviously, we need a seed. We need somewhere to begin the animation. And we're going to use just this spherical field here and set it to max, I believe. Just bring it down and place it here. The other thing I want to do is to make a very specific path along. And this is one of the great things about the fields as well, is that you can still use the shader effector. And if I set this to clip and select a Photoshop file, which I have here, fields, texture, path source. All it is a black and white image that I drew in Photoshop that looks like this. See, that's what I'm talking about. Just switching it to normal will let you visualize it. So it's just mapped across the UV space of this geometry. But I just painted this real rough, and I'm going to use this as kind of like my mat for as my radius control for that simulation that happened earlier. Instead of using a noise, we're going to use this shader field. So to do that, I can just set it to clip. And in a way, it will just delete every frame. Instead of restricting the growth, it will just like kill it on every frame. So, okay, we got that. We need it to grow, so we'll set it to average, just like that. Average, remapping. We'll bring this value up. And in theory, we should get it moving along the surface just like that. I could even just decrease it a little bit so it kind of like slinks along. But if I want it to move quickly, just do that for the sake of this presentation. So with that, nothing's really happening. What's really cool, though, is we can actually drive the MoGraph with this effect. What I want to do is actually just like blow them up. I want the shoes to just go flying up into space as this motion kind of follows the surface. So we need an upward movement to kind of get that simulation started. And the best way I found to do that, there's many ways to do this, is just with a simple plane effector. Or actually, we'll use a random effector, because I don't want them all to go up at the same rate. I kind of would like a little bit of variance. So let's try that. Right now, what's happened is all the shoes, nothing's happened actually. Let's throw that random in there. So now the shoes have moved again. But I want to think about this. I want the shoes to go only up. Right now they're going down and up. And I also want them to kind of have different randomized rotations as well. So within that random effector, we'll say this is the trigger. We're going to go into min-max, and right now you can see it's going 100% value in both directions, positive and negative. So we'll just drop that to 0 or even a little bit higher, so that we do want some movement when this effector impacts the shoe or reaches the shoe. We also don't want it going too far, so that looks good. I kind of just really want them to go up maybe a little bit in X and Z, and then I would like to see a little bit of like randomized rotation here as well, like that. So you can imagine this is like the end state. As the vertex map passes under it, this effector is going to be applied and give it this state. So we need to actually give it a fall off. So this is the great thing about fields, is that we can just throw in that vertex map. Oh, I keep hitting middle mouse. We'll just throw in that vertex map, and suddenly we're getting this movement where we get the shoes just kind of popping up when we need them to. But I want this to be more dynamic, so let's throw on a dynamics tag. Where is my right click? Oh, okay, there it is. We'll throw on a simulation, rigid body dynamics, Perfect, not on the shoe itself. And in trigger, we're going to set at velocity peak. So that means as that effector moves it, the moment it starts slowing down, it will just it will continue on and take those values as the velocity trigger, right? The velocity speed. So what will happen now is the shoes will fly up. Oh no, never mind. We have to tell it to pass it on to the children. Top level. Is that right? Oh yeah, there we go. Oh, actually, I don't want to see that yet. So I'm just actually going to set the scene back to the way it would be if you did this at home. So we'd have 100,000 gravity. So they're just flying off into infinity. Actually, gravity's taking over and kind of bringing them back down. But I'd kind of like them just to stop and slow down just as their animation, their dynamics kick in, just to really be, that's kind of cool. So this is a little bit crazy. This just looks like a ghost running through your house, kicking shoes all over the place. Let's not have that. Let's go into the forces, and we're going to add a force here. I've already done that, but I'll just show you where those are. Particles and friction. So this little object will let us add some overall friction to the scene. So it'll just kind of dampen down any animation. Right now it's just set to directional velocity. So you'll see it will slow down, but the spin just continues on. So let's add some angular momentum dampening to it as well. So they are slowing down. They're hitting each other, which is nice, but they're still falling. So let's go back and turn off dynamics. I'm just pressing Control-D just to jump over to the project settings. So now we're getting sort of the effect I was looking for, where they just kind of like float off. I think I'd kind of like them to just stop. So let's just increase this to maybe 20 and see what happens. That's kind of cool. Let's look at it. Maybe increase the... So yeah, I already baked this out. Let's just take a look at the final product here and get a sense of what that can look like. So this is really interesting. The geometry itself has nothing to do with the dynamic simulation. We're only cloning onto it, but we're still able to pull the vertex map from the geometry and use that as kind of like a distance fall off for the effectors to kind of take effect, specifically this random, just by throwing the vertex map into here. And then, of course, you can art direct that and paint whatever you want and use that for your own control. So that was kind of like my early explorations into fields, just kind of trying to see how I can use them in a bit of a dynamic way. Let's take a look at the next little piece. And that was this kind of decaying apple effect. This was rendered in Redshift. But again, using fields I imagine being able to now have this rot just happen across the surface gradually. So let's take a look at what that would look like. I just rendered off a quick example here of what that can look like. There's some artifacts there, obviously, but the effect is pretty sweet. And we'll just dive into that. Okay. So here's the apple. If we scrub through, we get this decaying, and we get a transition as well. Right now we're just seeing the other texture, but we get a transition from one state to the other, essentially. And how that's happening is actually quite straightforward. So let's build that up. So I have my Apple mesh here. You'll see that this already is kind of different. We have, oh wow. We have a bit more of an irregular mesh. So in this case, the growth setting, or growth mode inside the freeze is actually going to do the job just fine. So what we want is to do this on the vertex level again. So I'm going to create some vertex maps. And actually, we're going to create two. First of all, I'm just going to set this weight, vertex weight, to 0 so that we get a completely 0 vertex weight map. No values on it yet. And then the other one we want is actually the stem, because I don't want this simulation to travel up the stem and to like invert the polygons and stuff. The stem is probably going to just stay still, so it'll stay as it is, and we'll just expand that. I'm pressing UY. You can see, what is that? Grow selection. So I'm just growing the selection down. And then once I think I've got most of it, I can just set selection, set vertex weight, and set that to 100. So now we've got, oh, I just did that wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I had the vertex map selected, and it just applied it straight to it, which I don't want. I need to have nothing selected so that when I do it, it gives me a new one. So this one I'm just going to say stem. And actually, I'm going to use the weights, the brush weights, brush. No, what is it? Weight paintbrush. Oh, here we go. Yes. So I just double click on the vertex map and it'll give us the paint tool. And I'm going to set it to smooth and then just smooth out this transition between one and the other, just so we don't get too hard edges up there. Okay, so we got that and we got a solid one. So we're going to do the simulation on the solid one. Turn on fields and set the layer to grow, just like that. So nothing's going to happen right away because we need that initial seed, right? So let's throw in a spherical field here and just decrease it. Our scene's quite small here, so keep that in. We got to keep that in mind. The numbers will be different to what I was working with a second ago. Where is it? There it is. So if I bring that up here and select, now we're getting a nice big selection here. I'm just going to decrease it a little bit more. And that's set to max, so if we hit play, it just instantly goes white. Why is that? Because the scene is actually quite tiny. I'm just going to like measure it, actually. I'm curious. We can just click here. It's about 4 centimeters. So let's get rid of that. I don't want that. Delete. So it's about 4 centimeters. So if this thing is expanding at a rate of, what is it expanding at a rate of? 10 centimeters a frame? Yeah, it's going to be way too much. So let's say 0.1. So that works. It's a little bit fast. I might just decrease the effect strength. And maybe 0.8. This is also not great because I'm kind of seeing the polygons between it. It's not perfect. I'm just got to bring it back up to 1 and maybe decrease the strength a little bit to like 20. And that slows it down a little bit. And so what we're going to do now as well is just bring in that stem that I painted out and set that to subtract. And so that will restrict the animation to the area that we wanted it to happen in, which is nice. Or maybe minimum? No, definitely subtract. Sweet. Okay. I'd also like a little bit of variation and randomness. So let's throw into the radius again that same technique of the random field. And in here, we don't need so much space up here. In here, change it from random to noise. And right now, it's absolutely enormous. So let's just scale that down quite a bit. just so we can see the noise. And then I'm going to bring it down to maybe 10 just to see. Okay, so that's kind of what we want. But I feel like it's a little bit too harsh. It's really restricting the growth. So what we can do is just reduce the strength of it. Or no, what do we need to do? Oh, we need to remap it. That's what we need to do. So we need to go into the radius, the noise, and then remap here so that our minimum isn't so low. So this is basically the minimum radius that it can expand. And the maximum, I kind of want it to be at that, or inner offset. Maybe I can just do this. Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted. You also notice it's like some areas it just doesn't reach. And what I found the best way to get around that is just to give it a little bit of animation. So if we just animate it, the areas in which it's growing into kind of undulate and change slightly and gives us a nice effect. So, sorry, I'm clicking through really quickly. Let's just play around with the min-max again a little bit, see what happens. So that's starting to look interesting. Still getting some areas I'm not a fan of. But with just tinkering with these numbers, we can kind of get it to where we want. Maybe even if I increase this slightly. Let's see, let's say 1.5. That's a little much. It's a little much, 1.1. I just don't want such a hard edge, which I'm getting here, but I think for the sakes of this is fine. This will do. Okay, so we can actually control where this begins and where it ends by just moving this around. You know, bring it over to the other side. Bring it to the bottom. We can move it around while it's happening. Kind of add this decay effect to where we want. This could be an interesting technique, just having it come up straight over. And we want to deform it, so we want that kind of deformation to move the apple inward and shrink it, and we want that buckling to happen on the surface. So now we actually just use a bunch of different deformers here to get that. So first, like earlier, we're going to use the displacer, and we're just going to apply it underneath as a child. And we're going to go into the shading and do the same trick, just add a color value of 1. Right now it's displacing it by 10 centimeters, so that's going to be a lot, but it's a cool effect, so let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to add the restriction tag again, restriction, and bring in our animation layer, vertex layer, into the restriction. And let's see what happens. So it's exploding now for some reason. I don't know why that other apple, what happened there, but. Why is it doing that? Clear? That's very interesting. Well, it's a good thing I have a backup. So we'll just ignore that. Move over here. And turn all these guys on. So first of all, we have the apple. Nothing's happening. We've got our simulation happening here, I believe. If I turn on that. Where is it? Oh, it's happening on this side. So I actually added a little bit of animation here just so the animation doesn't happen straight away. I have a feeling I turned off the field as well. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Oh no, that's working. Oh, I just had the wrong one selected, okay. Okay, so that. So this is the same thing we had earlier. It's growing out from that point. And we add a displacer here with the same restriction tag. setting that vertex with the animation layer, that vertex map. All right, so now what we get is this transition from one state to another. I'm just going to turn off the texture for real quick. We get this transition, but it's not giving us that buckling effect that we really want. The best way to do that is to actually kind of use a nice little tool within the smoothing. So you wouldn't really think that the smoothing would give you that kind of buckling, but there is a little setting in here, a little known setting, which is super, super handy. So I'm actually going to apply two smoothings. One is just going to be a little bit just to give me a bit more of a smoother transition between one state and the other. So this is without it. This is with it. So that's actually smoothing it, but I'm actually going to add another one on top or below. And we're going to set it to relax. And what relax needs is it needs the initial state so it can basically find the distances between each polygon, and then it will try to push them back to that after the deformation happens. And this is really helpful if you're ever like doing a character and as they're walking, their clothing maybe is kind of crumpling in on itself. This would give you a really realistic cloth effect without having to do any heavy simulation. So let's just set initialize there, and we should just be able to hit play. And we should start seeing something happen. Oh, it's still very stiff. So now we're starting to get this kind of buckling movement across the surface. And it's very low resolution geometry we're working with. So my solution to that was, when I did this in Redshift, I just applied a tessellation and added some subdivision, and that worked great. Super fast to work with. I set this up just with the default renderer, just so it's easier. Redshift is sometimes kind of a rabbit hole you can go down, and you need to drop a lot of nodes. So what I did was just throw it into a subdivision, and that should give us something nice and smooth. Actually, yeah, let's see. So this starts to give us that buckling that we're looking for. If we even just increase the effect of that initial one, we get a really cool dynamic effect. And you can just, your imagine should just be running wild now. You can use this for so much. Bananas, oranges, you could use it for basically anything. So let's also use this animation to drive the texture. And this is super easy. So if you have Redshift, if you have Octane, whatever, all of these have math tools for using these fields, these vertex maps, within the shader. So what I'm going to do is just delete that, turn on the shader again. So we've got our apple. Looks great, super healthy. I'm just going to rename it to B. And we're going to do a couple little changes. So, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Inside the diffuse, I want to change the color a little bit. So what I will do is just, under texture, is hit filter. And it will take the texture that was already there, throw it into a filter, and we can actually change a little bit here the settings. So I'm going to just throw, where'd it go? Oh, whoops, I deleted it. My bad. Let's undo all of that. All right, B. And so we're in here. We'll go into the reflectance and try that again. So filter. Just give it a bit of like discoloration. Bring the saturation down, or maybe up a little bit. Lightness down. Just make it look as disgusting as possible. It's kind of like Shrek's apple or something. In here, maybe increase the contrast, reduce the light a little bit again. Just kind of want it to go brownish. All right, well, this is good enough. And the other thing we want to do is to mask between them. So within just the standard materials, One really easy way to do that is to add a alpha channel. And right now that is set to something else. So just clear that out. And what we're going to do is actually bring in the vertex maps. So inside Effects, Vertex Map, and then here, bring in our vertex map selection. And what this should give us, if I let it play through for a little bit. So right now, this is kind of what's slowing it down, so we can speed things up by just turning those off for a second, because we don't need to simulate that every frame. That just can happen after, which is really handy. And if I render, the alpha is actually just letting both textures mix together nicely. We're getting the rotting apple kind of happening where it should be, and that's the effect. So let's turn that all off and check out the final again. So what I did actually was take what we did there, and then I just baked out an alembic pre-subdivision, and that just lets the subdivision work really quickly and let me scrub through, and all the vertex maps and everything still come through within the alembic. So you've got a nice asset that you can just give to someone and use however you want. So let's take a look at something else. Where are we going? Instagram. So this is probably the last thing I'm going to have time to show you. It is actually that wasn't very informative at all. Let's go into the render. This was me just playing around with trying to create some tileable geometry that kind of looped within itself. I was inspired by some posts I saw on Pinterest and then decided to try to build it myself. But along the way, I kind of learned a couple of interesting things which I thought would be fun to show and to pick apart. So let's head over there to the hex undulate. So this is essentially the scene. This is kind of a recreation of it. Sometimes I just don't save my working files when I'm doing like these experiments, and then I'm just left with the renders. But usually they're so small, I can just recreate them quite easily. So what we have here is a ton of tiles which are being kind of pushed around and moving based on some noisy fields. Oops, where is the C? There we go. Just get rid of the textures. And what's key here is that there's this rotation happening within every single one. If I kind of wanted this random path that snakes through it, and I also wanted this noise to happen separate from the actual geometry itself. So what's happening here is actually there's no simulation going on other than just deforming a piece of geometry and then cloning onto that. So let's take a look at how that kind of comes together. I'm just going to get out of this camera. And we'll take a look first at the geometry that we're using here. So at its base, I don't want to see that. Why is that there? Okay. I want to see edges. Oh, it's very dark. Why is that happening? Okay, there we go. So at its base, this is the only piece really. It's you can see if I kind of move this over here. There's a lot of symmetry involved. What is happening? Oh, I know what it is. It's this guy. Okay, there we go. There's a lot of symmetry involved, so it was kind of interesting picking apart the shape so that I could build just the most basic piece of it and then use the symmetry objects to get there. And all it really is making sure that everything kind of lines up and then throwing those into one symmetry, which just reflects it on this side, and then another, which reflects it again. And that gives us this nice tile that we can then throw into our animation. So let's kind of figure out how that works. I'll turn that off. No need to play. And then check out the surface now. So to clone them, what we kind of need is the same surface, right? We need something that these things can clone onto. I want to put them in the center of a polygon. In the same way we did earlier, we just set the object, the mode of our cloner to object. And I'm setting it to polygon center. But what that means is I need the polygons to be the same shape as our tile. And there are many ways you can do that, but what I found was just to create an n-sided object spline, and then with a spline mask with caps turned on, that gives me a nice piece of geometry that I can then copy out, hopefully, and hit C to make it editable. So now we've got a piece of geometry that we can work with, and this is kind of the base of what we're going for here. I'm just trying to think, how big does it need to be? Quite big. So let's scale this up. Quite huge. Oops. So we'll just scale up, and then I'm going to hit US. Oh no, not that way. U-Shift-S, and turn off smooth subdivisions. And then this will start cutting down the object into smaller and smaller triangles that will get us down to the base shape that we want. And so you can already see it's starting to give us the resemblance of what we're looking for here. I'm just going to do that for this tutorial. And let's just clone on. I'm actually here using a connect, so I'll just explain that real quick. So we're going to go over to the symmetry object. I'm going to take the one that I've actually baked out, which is editable. Let's just zoom in on that, selected. So I'm just going to take this guy, and I'm going to clone it onto the surface of this geometry. You can see already it's not going to fit properly, so let's just take this base geometry down quite a bit. Let's see. Let's get top down just to double check. Oh no, that's not what I want. That's fine. Whatever. We'll figure it out as we go. So let's get a connect and reference that object in. So when you bring in a connect, nothing happens, and most people will just throw the object in underneath, and that works. But what you can actually do is just leave this separate and bring your object in here to the objects, and then this kind of acts as an instance. Although it's not an instance, it's a separate object, but it lets us just throw it into our cloner, which I'll do from scratch again, just so we can see the problems that will arise. I'm going to throw this into our cloner. Set the mode to object, bring in our base surface geo, which is this guy. That's not what we want at all. It's just setting them to the surface like we did with the shoes earlier. So let's set that to polygon center. And my theory here now is that because I moved something, it's giving us a lot of versions. So let's work with not the tile segment, but rather this symmetry. Let's see what happens. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now that's working. Let's get rid of that wireframe. So this is very heavy. There's a lot of geometry happening here. We can actually just set this to render instance or multi-instance. The viewport suddenly is usable again. But they're all in the wrong orientation, so that's a simple fix again. Let's throw some rotation into here, like that. So 90 looks like it works there. And we're going to need some other value. in between. Actually, what's interesting is we're kind of missing these inner pieces. There's a couple of ways you could get around this. If you were using triangular pieces, that would work. Right now, what you can, like, they would kind of sit together. What I found, though, is that you sometimes need different shapes geometry to be able to clone into specifically. So that's why I also have this geometry here. I probably should have explained how to do this. We probably could, but I don't have a lot of time. So what I'm just going to do is use this other geometry. The project files for this will be online, by the way. And we'll throw this into the cloner instead of the triangular pieces. And here they're starting to overlap a little bit better. That was my fault. I probably should have just started with this anyway. Okay, so everything is overlapping in a really insane way. Let's play with the transforms again, just see if we can get those to look right. 180 seems to be, or negative 90. Negative 90 seems to work, and then the rotation is also off. So we actually, yeah, this is the problem. Once you start you kind of get like gimbal lock. So what I'm going to do is just add a MoGraph effector and just rotate all of them really simply just by, I think it's going to be a few degrees, 30 degrees. And so now we're starting to get this infinite tile pattern. But what I want is to kind of rotate them randomly by 60 degrees, because there's 360 degrees, there's 6 identical pieces, 6 identical edges that can be lined up. But we don't really, it is mirrored, so we only really need 3, if that makes sense, because we don't need to do a full circle for it to work. So what we'll do is we'll bring in a formula effector. And actually, Chad was mentioning this earlier. He had a different way of quantizing your fall-off field. There's many ways you can do everything inside of Cinema 4D, but this is one way I found that Rick Barrett from Cineversity has a little video on. So in the, not Python, sorry, in the formula, where is it? Formula. We're going to apply some 60-degree rotation. Let me just make sure that's working. 60 degrees, perfect. Oh, that's not 60, that's 60. And within the effector, we're going to use a little expression. So we're going to create a random number between 0 and 3. So 0 and 3. And we also should throw in a seed because it can change, and like if you come back in another version of Cinema 4D, that seed might be totally random, and then it might not give you exactly what you were looking for. So that's just good practice. And then we're going to put that in brackets and round this to the closest integer. So this will give us basically 0, like 60-degree intervals in a random way. So once we do that, we get this really nice little pattern that kind of loops forever and is actually quite nice to look at. And the other thing we want to do is to animate that base spline. So if we turn this off again, we have this that we want to animate. And that's just pretty simple. We throw in the displacer again, 10 centimeters for now. And we'll use actual noise in this one. I'm just going to bring the scale up quite a bit. And maybe a little bit more contrast. And I think that should be good. Let's just increase the scale quite a bit. No, that needs to be bigger. All right, so we got that. We want to animate it, so let's put some directional movement on it. Just some movement on the whatever axis that is, X, I guess. Yeah, that's X. And then if we turn on our cloner, this should be now animating nicely. Let's just hide that. And it's starting to look good. If you wanted to go a step further, you could even add a jiggle to this base this base mesh and just get even more organic movement into how these undulate. Oops, jiggle. Let's like crank this size even more. Whoa. And so now it just kind of gives it a little bit more motion when they come to a halt, and keeps these tiles a little bit more active for longer. Let's go to this mode and hide that. And check it out. I think that's all I have time for. I'm going to be over there in the booth. I just want to thank you all for coming as well, and I hope you learned something here, and you're able to take these, I don't know, lessons and do something interesting with it. Please share your stuff with me on Facebook or on Instagram. I'd love to see it. And yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.